So next question is, what's the solicitor looking for with regard to a buyer when protecting their client in regard to restraint conditions?
Yeah, well, so restraint conditions are interesting ones because at law, a restraint of trade is void as of right, unless you can show that it's reasonable in the circumstances. So if I'm acting for a buyer, I want to make sure that the buyer is going to be protected from what they're buying and that protection is reasonable. So if you're buying a real estate agency in a suburb that has managements that are around 3 or 4 suburbs around that, you can't then restrain that seller from acting all over Australia as a property management business, or even all over Queensland, or even in other suburbs. It's got to be reasonable in the circumstance, given what else is around in competition. So the main restraint that I look at when I'm looking for a buyer is a restraint over the managements that are being sold. Again, I said before that those are the real value in what's being bought, the Form 6s, and the management relationship with those people. So making sure there's a strong restraint for those is very important. Restraint of trade for an area also is important, especially to protect the business and what you're buying. But making sure that you restrain the buyers, the managements, and making sure that the seller can't come in and take those managements for a reasonable period of time is pretty important, because that's what the buyer's buying and that's what you want to protect.
And the banks require some sort of protection there too, aren't they? So they're going to be outlaying significant amounts of money to a buyer to purchase it. They want to know that in 12 months there's going to be a fairly reasonable likelihood that those managements have been retained.
Absolutely. And if you're a bank and you're lending lots of money to a buyer to buy a rent roll, then you're going to want to protect your interest, and they want to protect their asset. It's the same as with a home that's in a flood-prone area. They'll want insurance, flood insurance. They want to make sure they've got those kind of things to protect the buyer and themselves and their investment.
And another question within our contract, we have a tiered level, don't we, of time frame and area. Can you explain what that tier actually means?
So the technical legal term is a waterfall clause, and the idea is that the biggest restraint is the most is the one that you want. Then, if the court said that biggest restraint was unenforceable, then you can take off one tier and you can go to the next one. And then, if the court said that was unreasonable, then you can go to the next one. So, in almost all restraints of trade that you'll ever see in any business contract or even any employment contract, it'll have this tiered system. So that so if it was 20 kilometres, then that could be knocked out if it was seen to be unreasonable in the circumstances, and then say 10 kilometres
automatically. B comes into play, which might be 10 kilometres.
And so if you're a seller and you're trying to enforce that restraint, that allows the court to say, well, I think that top one's unreasonable, but I think the next one is reasonable. So it gives the court that flexibility if you need to actually go there and enforce a restraint.
Excellent, thank you. I do get asked that question at times. Restraint also, looking at restricting an employee or spouse within a contract, how is that possible?
Well, that's a tough one because they've got to be willing to sign a restraint. So you can restrain anyone from doing anything if they sign a contract saying that they're not going to do it. It's a contract if it's drafted properly. There are some technical requirements to meet a contract in those terms that you have to show was reasonable in the circumstance. But if a buyer's spouse or employee agrees to sign the contract, then fine. They can be restrained. But you've got to get them to agree to it, and that's always the toughest point. You need to think if you're a buyer and you do want that, you probably need to think about that before you go on conditional, because the seller wouldn't normally have to provide that. So you'd want to get onto that early.
Okay, but if someone's not a director of the company, there is a way in which you can create a restriction condition around external people, and spouses are probably the most common situation with regard to that.
If they sign a deed of restraint, then they've agreed to be restrained for that area for that period of time, then they're bound by that restraint.
Okay.
Unless it seems to be unreasonable. But the answer to your question is yes. But it's a great lawyer answer. It depends because there's always other.
You bloody lawyers.
Yeah, that's what we get paid for.